phrase. I'll
Welcome
just put
back
it
to
in
the
here
Diaspota podcast today. And
because I
today
know
we've
it'll
got
come up.
Lawrence joining us. Lawrence, I understand you're in the Republic of Chaz as we speak. And the war is going well for somebody. I don't know who. So, welcome, welcome to the podcast. And
Yeah, good morning from Western Washington.
is that Western Washington, or is it like, is it going to be West Washington when the rest of the state splits off to join Greater Idaho?
Oh, it's Cascadia, sir.
Cascadia. That actually sounds kind of nice, It
Casc
sounds like
Cascadia now. That's what I say.
that's what you say. Is that what is that something that other people are saying right now, or are you
I
just trying
think that,
to?
I mean, if you look up, there is a wiki article on Cascadia. I think it's a very small movement. Maybe, I mean, given the makeup of the demographics, it could potentially be something that picks up steam, but you don't really hear it talked about to the same degree as like Alberta separation or anything like that. But the idea is there.
Okay, and so just because I haven't heard this term before, what would qualify as Cascadia? If I bring up my handy map here, just
You
a
know, I
minute.
don't know if also I think it might be helpful to maybe see what the article says about it because I don't know if there are definitive borders. I mean, I think it would be made up of um, a group of people that don't like borders. So it is
Oh, here it
whatever
is
you want
too.
it to be, but look, it's got its own flag, and let's see, Cascadia. Okay, well, you do
Cascadia,
Cascadia region,
Oregon.
Cascadia movement, Cascadia movement, a bioregional movement based within the Cascadia bioregion of the Pacific Northwest of North America.
Okay,
Um,
let's see here.
I
Oh,
mean,
there
there
he is.
was,
Okay,
yeah, there was a link there on the page.
okay. Oh,
So I mean
so
that
this would
and
include
and you'll
BC then.
notice that it includes a piece of the 51st state. Would be very pleased to have this alliance of like Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland. Um, and you do I guess this map covers all of Eastern Washington, but I don't know if you could kind of cut the state in half if you think about sort of political orientation.
Yeah, I was
So.
gonna say I don't know how much. I mean, I was in Alaska years ago. It
Mhm.
actually was a pretty substantial event in my life. The reasons I won't go into here, but it actually was one of those. When you get to be in our age cohort, like there's moments where you look at it and go, "Wow, that really changed a lot." And it was Alaska for me, but I don't know if the Alaskan Panhandle would want to go along with us either, or for that matter, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
no, I know,
BC.
or even part of the Yukon.
Yeah, oh, the Yukon, they're kind of funny. They're really big partiers up there, believe it or not. I mean, some of the Alaskans are too, from what I was introduced to. So I mean, I can see, believe it or not, I can see that culture fitting in. I don't know if that's just kind of a Pacific, North
hmm
American culture thing.
hmm
But yeah, no, that's interesting. I didn't know that this was, a thing. And yeah, as you said, like with all of the got Alberta sitting right next door there. I know BC Interior is like, take us with you.
Yeah.
And then I obviously south of the border, you get into Idaho, and you got both Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington looking to link up with Idaho to try to escape the coast. So yeah, Cascadia, eh?
Yeah,
That's
well, who knows? I mean, these days we could just create whatever gerrymandered map that we want to get the best outcome, right?
Oh, that's true. So, is this like the effort to get the marijuana party into Congress? Is that what they're going for here?
I think you could look at it as several different ways. Like I said, I've never actually really looked at a map of this seriously. I just could see that I could see just basically the germination of the idea there, but uh, 19 million people right there.
19 million. Yeah, that's not small. So, interesting. And like I guess is it like them forming their own country, outside of the US and Canada, or is this
Oh, it would probably be some sort of
oh
sovereignty association.
advocated an independent nation that would be free in the United States. And historically, it looks like it goes, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to look into this later.
This is an idea that goes way back, and maybe we should I'll do some research and maybe come back again and maybe uh, give this idea a little bit more of a examination, eh?
Absolutely. No, that'd be fun. I like looking into these things. I'm a big fan of Mr. Z, if you're familiar with that channel. He goes into a lot of this stuff. And some of the stuff, like he makes a good effort at research. There's been some times where he's trying to explain like, Canadian political or legal setup, and I just kind of cringe a little bit because, he's done a lot of research, but there's some things that, are admittedly not well known, but that he's just kind of presumed upon or has read upon, and I shouldn't say presumed upon, but has read up on, and it's bad information. So, but that's okay. So we'll have to have a Cascadia episode for sure in the near future. Let me know, and we'll set that up. But yeah, let's I guess start this off because this is your first time joining us here today, and I wanted to ask because I mean, you and I both are from Canada. Met in school way back in the
Mhm.
day. Had a lot of fun, causing a lot of trouble for all the wrong people. But
Those are the right
uh,
people.
yeah, well, that's true. They are. I guess they would be the right people in that case. But yeah, like, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this in great detail. I think we've got a few comments back and forth, but what's your take, seeing as you're on the safe side of the US Canada border right now, what's your take right now on what's going on in Canada with, the new Carney government and the separation movement you just mentioned,
Mhm.
like how are you feeling about where Canada's going here as we get deeper into the 21st century?
I think, I mean, I think without a doubt, it just has not gone the right direction for quite a while, and that COVID period, I think, really highlighted that. Um, I've definitely, I mean, I try to go back at least once or twice a year. I think this year it'll only be once, but there are definitely signs that, it's not the country that I left. Toronto's not the city that I left at the time. A lot of signs of what could be construed as a failing state, not necessarily by explicit intention, but just by lack of care. But then I guess when the trucker movement kind of happened, I think it really blew open sort of these hidden wounds within our national fabric. And then everything that's happened since then, from the protest in Ottawa to today, I think it sort of builds on top of another, right? We saw sort of a hopeful rise of some restoration of reason to the political dialogue with the way that Pierre Poilievre campaigned. Trump, I would say, sort of sabotaged that momentum, and then it became this kind of ambiguous elbows up thing, whatever that meant and whatever it means today. And so I think everybody's trying to give Mark Carney a chance because just Canadians don't they have a greater distaste for constant debate and argument. You even notice and it's not that I'm paying that close attention to the day-to-day dealings of government, but even Her Majesty's loyal opposition isn't really
His
being
now.
that
Is it
oppositional, right?
his or is
His,
Kamala in charge
well,
yet?
you'd have to ask him, I guess. We haven't really asked, but let's go. His Majesty's loyal opposition hasn't really been all that in opposition, just sort of more laissez-faire and just kind of let things roll.
Yeah, no, no, for sure. And it was a weird election. I mean, I had actually a party for everyone here in Texas, a watch party. I even had bingo cards. It was actually a lot of fun. And I mean, you have to go back, if you look at the numbers, you have to go back to 1972, because, all know this stuff historically, to find an election that close between the liberals or like the Democrats for the American audience here and the conservatives who are like the Republicans. It was a really interesting election to watch, even though obviously was a little disappointed that the liberals got in, but not surprised. But I wanted to kind of just also just kind of touch upon one thing that you mentioned, which is,
Mhm.
like, going back to Toronto, and I mean, I've seen this. I went back for my first time last year. Uh, you know, I actually talked, I won't mention the area or the person, but I talked to a local politician in an area of Ontario, over something unrelated. And I mentioned I was coming in a few weeks at that point, and this person said to me, well, just be careful. It's not the same place it was when you left. And I had to explain the year that I had left, which
Hmm.
wasn't too long ago. And so I think this is a theme that's starting to kind of develop. But for those who are maybe kind of, especially because in the States, I think I've never seen this much attention, focused on Canada, or being aware of what's going on up there. But if you had to give maybe one or two examples of what you think is, kind of that sign of a failed or a failing nation, or a failing state, what would you say that would be?
I think, I mean, I feel like the homelessness numbers are up in Toronto. Certainly, kind of the distribution through the city of homeless panhandlers, and I think that that comes in waves. To be fair, but I think that the distribution is just more. It seems more apparent, and just in general, I have a very for some reason, I have a visceral memory of like one of my local CIBC branches that was just completely littered, like around the ATM area. Just the it's just like symbolic of a lack of care or concern about the general environment. And that's not to say that I don't see the same thing in the cities here, but it's we used to be very proud of Toronto the good and Toronto the clean, and it's we seem to have kind of taken a departure from that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think this is one of those things, like, especially for those who are in, rural Canada, parts of the States where, this may not be as evident. And I'll say this, like, it's not as evident in Texas, for some reason. It's not that it can't go that way. In fact, I think we're a generation away from joining, places like Toronto if we're not careful here. But, one of the things that theoretically was always talked about when societies go into decline is just generally people stopped caring. And
Hmm.
one of the things, I mean, you don't have to agree with his politics or, his lifestyle or anything, but Rudy Giuliani actually gave a good example when he was mayor of New York of how you can actually, uh, kind of push back against this. And, another thing, I'll bring up the article. It's called the broken glass theory. And again, I understand
Broken
that
windows
for,
theory.
is it broken window or is, well, let's try.
Broken windows is
Yeah, there it
basically
is.
if you see a
Yeah.
broken window in a street and you don't fix it, then it's just going to fester and it sends a message that nobody cares and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I won't name the company, but I sent you over something where I think that Tim Hortons, well, there, I just said Tim Hortons, the national coffee chain, is
And
the
you can bleep
quality
that
of
out, I guess.
services. Well, no, no, I'll put it in. We've already taken a shot at Tim Hortons in one of our shorts anyway. But I like Tim Hortons, right? I'm excited. We're getting more around here, in our area, and
Really, in
it's
Texas.
oh, in Texas, yeah. Actually, there's one that is very conveniently located to a place that I frequent, pretty
Huh.
regularly, and so that's exciting. My firstborn has already been introduced to Timbits, and I'm waiting for number two to get old enough to get there too. But no, going back to this, like, for anyone who's like, part of the younger audience, and this is something I think that's important even for those of us who are in like the millennial, Gen X and Boomer generations to share, is that, New York was, kind of seen as a failed city, or failing city through most of the 1970s and 80s as well. And you can see this, for example, in movies from like 1973's
Hmm.
Pelham 123, the original, which was actually a really interesting movie. I haven't seen the remake, but the original is kind of neat. And there was kind of the sense, Escape from New York, right, was another one in the 80s. And there was a sense that like this city was not long for the world. But Giuliani came in, he ran and won in what was considered a bit of an upset, but he ran on a law and order platform, which
Right.
actually tends to work with people who consider themselves to be very socially liberal or what we would now call woke. When you have a situation where it's not safe to walk two streets down to the subway, all of a sudden people will, they start to get a little more conservative, with their opinions. And for a
Hmm.
conservative party, and I think Polyev actually did do a good job of articulating this, and that's why he didn't get decimated in April in the Canadian election. When you start to kind of hit on those kinds of issues, it can actually bring up a wellspring of support to change this. And one of the things that he did when he implemented, solutions that were being proposed by, I guess, criminology professors, in the academia, was if they caught someone hopping the gate in the subway station, the police would actually take it seriously. They'd
That's
actually,
right. They
arrest
would
them.
they would but
Yeah.
they would arrest them, pull them aside, and have them like out for display to make an example of them, and then you'd end up with like just a whole line of gate jumpers.
Well, yeah, but what they also found with this too is that the guy that they pulled off to the side, they would check his background and find out that, he might have been wanted for homicide,
Huh.
right?
Yeah.
Investigation as well. So, and that's how they were actually getting some of the more dangerous criminals off the street, right? Is,
Interesting.
if you're willing to break a small law, then you're probably more inclined to break a big law, and vice versa.
And vice versa,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, so that, and I mean, I'll say this, like I went to New York, just shortly after his tenure as mayor there, and it was not a city that you felt unsafe to walk around in, right? I mean, I've been to Detroit, and
Yeah.
other places and I mean, Detroit's doing better now these days too, but uh, I've been to places where, I mean, New Jersey. I don't think I'll ever go into that state again because I've been 3 times, and every one of those times I've had something that I'm like, oh, I just barely got out with my life. But I didn't get that sense from New York back then. But I understand now. There's enough stuff going on these days because they've moved away from taking this stuff seriously in that city. And so again, I just kind of point this out, for anyone who's like looking at this, going, oh, well, how do we stop or stem the decline?
Right.
You actually need to deal with the lawlessness and what we would say is even the basic evil that people are willing to commit, even in relatively small manner, small things, right? Like the gate jumper in the subway, or
Yep.
someone who's maybe vandalizing the store, right? Because if they're willing to vandalize someone else's property, why aren't they? What's stopping them from stealing someone else's property as well,
So
right?
what I do understand, and as a common trope, by the way, is that it has a lot to do with the political leanings of the municipal leadership, right? So you'll hear the trope about Democrat cities and whatnot. So I sort of want to ask you if, like, I think Austin being, I don't know, we call Austin the Seattle of Texas. Is there a like a noticed difference between Austin and maybe some of the other more traditional big cities in Texas?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great question, and here they refer to it as the big blue pimple. So
Okay.
it's just sitting there in the middle of the state, and not really beloved either. But yeah, I'll put it this way. There's what they call the Golden Triangle down here. There's Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston, right? And then
Hmm.
you got a few other cities like Beaumont and El Paso. El Paso is a thing unto itself, because it's so far out there. I think you have to drive like 10 hours to get to that part of the state if you're coming from where most of Texans live, the east side of the state. Um, but to answer your question, having driven through Austin and then the other four cities that I mentioned as well, and even other places like, what's the other one? It would be well known. Anyway, I can't remember. But there's some cities that are been traditionally more industrial, and
Hmm.
maybe kind of a little bit more like blue collar,
Hmm.
and they've been a lot safer and a lot cleaner than Austin is. Austin actually is a very white collar city. It has not only a state capitol, so all the government buildings around it. It's got the University of and I know I'm gonna have pitchforks here, or probably like revolvers since it's Texas, but I think it's the University of Texas has their main campus there. right?
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that sounds right. And
UT Austin.
yeah, UT Austin, which I think is like the hub. And it, you know, you would think with all of that that the city would be a little safer and a little bit more well kept, but believe it or not, you don't have to go outside of the downtown too far to see, where there is kind of this, kind of rundown, you know, thing to it. And it reminds me a lot of like parts of like New York and Michigan, for example, the states
Hmm.
where like again, I think a lot of this has to do with like have people, like you were saying, have people given up on caring and they're just kind of surviving, or are they thriving? And Austin is very much a city which is surviving in the Texas context. It's not as bad as a lot of other places, but it is noticeable. When you look at places like Dallas and Houston, which are the two big cities, there are neighborhoods that are just no-go zones. It's just well known the police do not go, even the police in midday, in their cruisers, they don't go into those neighborhoods. They're just they stay out of there. And but most of the city includes in both of those cases, including the downtown area, the airport district, which traditionally is a little bit more you know uh, scary, I guess in most cases, including in Toronto. Those areas are actually pretty safe. You don't have too much of a problem. In fact, when I moved here to Texas, my real estate agent told me, and surprisingly, because I was coming from an Ontario context, and
Yeah.
for that matter, a northeastern context in the U.S. I thought, okay, well, I'm going to move somewhat, in the exurbs, maybe out into like, just outside of the city range. And my agent was like, actually, it's actually the outskirts that are actually the dangerous areas. It's the cities and the suburbs that are actually a little bit safer, and that's true,
Oh,
right? I've
that's
seen that.
interesting.
Yeah, I know it was surprised me too, but I've lived here long enough to actually attest to it that yeah, it's your small towns, depending on like not all of them, but if some small towns are a little dangerous to be around in. I mean, we've had like manhunts where they get the helicopters out and, like the guys, kind of trudging through some kind of bayou river, which we have here and, finally gets found held up in the basement of a relative or something. That's what's happening in the outskirts of Texas. It's the cities where things are a little bit more, it's not just a little bit, a lot more safe and a lot more, you know, uh,
Right.
yeah, they're pretty good. And it's not that they don't have problems, but it's the same kind of problems that, places like Vancouver and Toronto are just used to having, 30 years ago, right? 40 years
Yeah.
ago. This just comes with large populations. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a different experience here, but a good experience for that matter.
So you're right.
But
Like there is
yeah,
sort of this kind of historical, like there's something cyclical about those patterns, right? You sort of go um, from kind of the New York of the 80s and through the Giuliani years, and there can be quite a bit of variability from time to time. But even in the 80s, I just don't think that the discourse was as blatant as we're not going to prosecute theft under $1,000 or things like that. Like you didn't have the stores locking up the shampoo, right? It's very annoying to go be in San Francisco at the Target and you have to press a button and wait for a staff to come and unlock just so you can get, some trivial toiletry, right? Um,
yeah.
that that
I
that
haven't had that yet, but that would be annoying.
Well,
It's like what?
I hope you never see it. Like the local Target where I live, like they have the doors for that type of thing, but more often than not, these aisles they just keep them unlocked now. So like, should things get worse, they're prepared to lock down if they need to. But I I'd say for now that things are a little bit more optimistic. I also think that these chains are sort of recalibrating their location strategy. So more and more shops are closing in like the Union Square, Tenderloin part of San Francisco, just leaving that to be, you know, just all shuttered up because the city has no will to make that a livable region. Um, but you see a very direct correlation there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I went to San Francisco, I think it was in 2009, was my
Okay.
first time. And then I had gone back literally a decade later.
Hmm.
And it was amazing the stark contrast, right, between, that the first trip and the second, like a decade apart, because
Well,
I
I'll
know what
tell
you
you,
mean.
post
Yeah.
COVID, San Fran is just that's a whole other level.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I'm sure there's guys with eye patches that are jumping onto helicopters to get out of there. Uh, yeah, no, and that just, I think that's one of the themes I'm starting to realize a lot more is that you want to build a high trust society. It's not about a high or low regulation society because, you and I, going back to our earlier days together, we would run into like libertarians, for example, who take a very romanticized, like as in, the historical era,
Oh, to be a student,
view.
right?
Yeah, yeah, I would be a student, and some of them just kind of kept it, I think, too. But they take the view that like mankind, can enter into the social contract and understand the rules, and and we can leave them free to like trade in Bitcoin and live happily ever after, marrying their dog or whatever, right? And then on the other side, you have actually, and it's funny because you don't think of liberals as people who are very I think that's one thing COVID probably changed as well is that they've gotten a lot more restrictive. They're not liberal, and I don't like even using that term anymore because they're not like permissive about anything really anymore, except they're in, even on the things like, definition of marriage, which was, a big topic for us back in the day, that we were living through.
Mhm.
Um, it's not about the freedom to marry whoever you want. It's about you have to accept people for who they are, right? And so they've gotten very authoritarian in their disposition, and neither of those systems work because on the libertarian side, all it's going to take is the bad dudes to go run into Target, smash and grab, again, broken window, all that kind of stuff. And then on the liberal side, I mean, you can regulate and regulate and regulate. And what you're going to do, and I think China, what we're seeing over there right now is it's coming to a head here in our time where a society like China can only be micromanaged for so long before it just gets completely unproductive, right? And you could argue that in the West we've regulated ourselves too much as well, for that matter, with all the rules and hoops that we have to jump through. But what you really are aiming for is a high trust society. And in order to have a high trust society, you need people to basically have a personal fear and appreciation that doing the wrong thing is going to have consequences, right?
Mhm.
And I'm going to use this as a segue to bring us into our other topic for today, the state of marriage and how fragile that is. Because, if you look at kids, and I'll use this as the segue to jump in, kids, this is obviously on my mind a lot these days for obvious reasons, having, more kids come into my life now. Uh, Kids will, they're going to be searching for boundaries. It is true what you hear people say that have had kids before you. They're searching for boundaries, and if they don't have any, they are going to kind of get unhinged, almost like I'm going to compare it to a tomato plant. You have to have that wire mesh around the tomato plant for it to go straight and grow straight and grow tomato fruit. Or sorry, is it fruit vegetable? I don't remember. It's whatever.
That's a
The
tangent
tasty
I'm not
stuff.
going to touch.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
can't remember.
delicious regardless.
Yeah, it's just delicious regardless. But yeah, if you don't want that stuff rotting, as it would if it was on the ground, like the vines as they're growing out, you need to give it structure. And it, we're in a state right now as a society where we've had successive generations that have been basically left to raise themselves, and because their parents are too busy being too selfish or too self-absorbed, and that's not one generation in particular, although I think it's just kind of feeding upon itself with each successive generation to the point where the kids are wild. I mean, this is why you got the screaming TikTok babies who are like 35 years old, right? Yelling at the camera or, going out into the streets with bricks in hand. So with that, I'm going to bring this over to a couple of clips that, we had kind of started off with here, and I want to share this and get. We're going to start talking about the state of marriage and what we should be aiming for with this, and if it's maybe time that we review and redo what our expectations are for marriage. So I hope that this is going to work. I'm just going to go on mute to make sure that this works on the audio, and we'll get
Sure.
started.
Stay married, and we should order our laws to not encourage divorce, and we should just have them raise their kids like
No,
normal
I feel
people.
like some people need to get a divorce.
No, it has terrible effects on the spouses, but especially on the kids.
In certain
Right.
circumstances, it's like with abortion. Shit has to happen. Like a certain circumstance with divorce and marriage, like you need to get, like some people need to get divorced.
Yeah.
I don't really know if that's true.
It is.
Certainly in the case of
In abusive relationships, you think a woman just because she's married to a man should stay?
in a certain circumstance, there is a good moral argument to have some kind of a separation, or perhaps even a civil divorce if that were required to protect.
So do you agree
the
with
children.
that?
I don't think that divorce is a sacramental reality. I think that marriage is eternal. And I think that even practically speaking, when people get a divorce, they don't really get a divorce because they're speaking to their ex-spouse all the time, and they're arranging child visits and arranging out. So just as a practical matter, you are still just kind of married to this person, and you have a bad marriage. But which is why I would strongly discourage divorce. If there's a case where for the protection of a child or someone you need to have a separation, okay, I understand there are these sorts of exigencies. But more broadly speaking, what we're talking about in the American divorce regime is called no-fault divorce. And no-fault divorce is, one, a contradiction in terms. You can't break a contract if there's no fault of anyone. And two, it's horrific for children, and it's horrific for the spouses. They just stay married, and we should order our laws to not encourage divorce, and we.
Okay. So, Lawrence, I'll give you the first shot of this. I think it got posted a few days ago, so I think this is relatively recently when Michael Knowles was on whatever podcast. But is it time for us to be reviewing, I guess at the state level or the provincial level, or national if you're in another country outside of North America? Is it time for governments to start reviewing and the idea of no-fault divorce in our societies?
You know, this like kind of idea came from like the 70s about kind of getting out of people's personal business, right? And I think it's going to take a lot for governments to brazenly kind of get back onto these like third rails of having this appearance of injecting themselves into people's private lives, except that they have very public consequences. I recently read a book called Primal Loss, and it's really adult talking about reflecting on the impact of their upbringing out of divorce, primal loss, LOSS.
Okay.
And it's just it's a compendium of testimonies, and you really see um how broken it can be. Like you'll see a lot of these divorce debates don't really center around children, and I think it's important to recenter that the conversation around that. There's a thing called like Chinese divorce, which is like you wait till you're empty nester, because there is this idea that if you divorce prematurely, it would have some tragic impact on the kids, and it's not a good idea either, but at least it's a little bit more child centric in its consideration. It's just an idea anyway. But like when two people, if there's like a abuse situation or whatnot, like I don't know how you jump from one particular circumstance and overgeneralize it to people should get divorced because of this and that, which has nothing to do with some of those particular circumstances. And they mentioned abortion in that clip. Same thing with the abortion debate. How do you go from rape and incest to arbitrary choice to some people need to get an abortion, right? There's just this logical fallacy, and in both cases, you have very severe societal implications. I think it's been really hard to draw the straight line to those implications. Reflections like these, I think, start to help paint that picture. I've had some close friends of mine recently go through this sort of journey of very dubious journey of getting into a divorce, and I'd say that nothing, absolutely nothing good came out of that.
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
take these particular stories and generalize them in a public policy way, even though these stories of hurt have come because of a very public policy change in the way we think about this like institution of our society?
Yeah, no, and I think on that, like there's two things very broadly that we need that I think we're finally prepared to acknowledge, what is it, 65-ish years after the sexual revolution had begun, because a lot of this public policy change came not because politicians all of a sudden kind of got the wild idea that, well, maybe we should just rewrite, the whole civil contract thing, at the family level, but because there was a movement, not just, again, not just amongst the baby boomers, right? And again, we have been known for being too harsh on the boomers on this podcast, so I'm just going to point that out there. It was also the silent generation in particular, those who were born in the 1930s, who really spearheaded a lot of this stuff and had come of age in the 1960s, that
Hmm.
were pushing a lot of these policy changes because they wanted to get the culture there. I mean, this is let's not forget, this is the era where we got James Bond, which was a novel in the 50s that was then turned into the movie franchise that we know today. All of that stuff was coming out of, the policy was at the end. I mean, in the U.S. context, it was Ronald Reagan. Everyone knows the infamous story on the conservative side. He was the first governor when he was in charge of California in 1969 to bring in no-fault divorce, and then all the other states kind of followed fairly quickly. I think what I've read up on it, the peak of no-fault divorce was actually the early 80s. It's dropped since then, but that could be just because there was such a backlog of people that were using the change in laws to get out of their marriages. Sort of like what you're saying, Chinese divorce,
Hmm.
situations happening maybe in the 80s. But what we have to remember with this at the end of the day is that you know sometimes when we make a change, and this was something we dealt with like the gay marriage debate back, in the day when we first got to know each other. There were
Yeah.
people who were like, well, if it's so bad, then clearly we'll see the consequences right away. And that's a very immature way of thinking about things. Right. I was hearing this again from like very libertarian folks who were very conservative and understood the idea of delayed gratification, right? That, maybe we don't want the government to give us a safety net over absolutely everything we want in our lives because we actually have to go and work. Otherwise, nothing's going to be done in our society. So they understood this on the economic side, but they never applied that to the social side, right? They never applied that. And I know, I remember you said back in the day you don't like the idea of like, referring to ourselves as social conservatives, and that's fine. But I'll put it this way: is that like within the spheres um, you know, of society as far as how we interact with each other, there are, again, economic things, and you heard on that clip from whatever that they were talking about contracts. But sometimes contracts aren't just, I'm going to give you money, you're going to give me a product. This is going to be, I'm going to restrict my rights or restrict my freedoms in order to, give some kind of security or assurance, whatever it would be. That those are contracts that we've had as long as civilization has existed as well. And one would argue, I mean, as again, the Enlightenment thinkers even argues, and I don't think it's a perfect model, but it's what a lot of people accept these days, the social contract, right? The idea that you're going to restrict your rights or allow a government to rule over you and restrict what you can do so that you're not just in the car on the road causing carnage on the interstate, right? And so this is something where, again, now we've been through three generations of this regime, the sexual revolution regime.
Hmm.
And now maybe we can actually look back on it and see the consequences where it wasn't obvious at first. And people shouldn't need to, see, their sin and their fault in their face before they repent of it. But again, if you read, anything from, in the Bible, the book of Judges, right, is a good example of this, all the way up to, just history. right, secular history through the 20th and now 21st century, this pattern repeats itself again, where human beings, we like to push the envelope, say, well, we can do it differently. I mean, communism tried this and has
Right.
continued to try it ever since. Like, we're going to create this ideal society. It'll work this time in theory. And then, it's funny. Even I would argue, even communist China isn't really communist anymore. It's more fascistic, because even they had to realize after 3 generations of their experiment that, maybe this whole thing isn't working out the way that we had expected it to. So, I think with that said, the Overton window has shifted. You have, again, especially with Gen Z and with younger people, anyone who's maybe under 35 or so, they're willing to have this discussion, especially amongst men, admittedly. But I think, a good number of women as well out there who are like, you know what, this is not good. I mean, I don't have a clip right up here ready to go right now, but the internet is littered with guys who are saying in comments or in videos, I'm opting out of marriage because frankly there is no good reason to get married when a woman can come with the authority of the state backing her up and a lot of other institutional actors and basically ruin my life, right?
Yeah.
Make me far, far worse off than I would ever be, not because of the money, although that, obviously that there's a financial cost that comes with that, but because she's going to bear me kids, they're going to be my kids too, and then she's going to rip them away, and the state is going to enforce that. I'm going to have to pay for them, but I'll never get to bond with them. They're probably going to be turned against me. And the famous line that a lot of guys are using right now is that you should never enter into a contract, speaking of marriage in this case, that where the other person is incentivized to break it. And on that note, I know one of the things you said to me in the lead up to this is that you seem to notice that like the people who are divorced, seem to get the bigger benefit out of it. Because, again, can be a lot of women, but also I think you said there could be a lot of men as well that can kind of pursue divorce because they know they're going to basically be better off, often at the expense of the other person.
Right. And that's just my own personal observation of it. I mean, and I really mean when I say better off, I do mean primarily like financially, and whoever initiates it could somewhat feel vindicated in their decision, or just sort of stubborn to kind of dig their heels in without really thinking about the big picture. And I think that that's hard to make people see when they're really tunnel visioned towards their goal and not broadly looking at the greater good.
Yeah, and one thing as well on this is that I think one of the problems we have, and this kind of encapsulates a lot of issues we've had with the marriage debate that's been going on over the last few generations, is I like to ask a lot of people, well, what is a marriage? Like it's almost like the Matt
Right.
Walsh, what is a woman thing? I've been
Exactly.
Yeah, I've been asking the what is a marriage question for years now because it's a very poignant question to get to the heart of the issue, which is that the answer I usually get from people when I ask that, and they're not coming from, say, a Christian worldview or any kind of, religious background. Like, because again, Muslims, Hindus, they, by God's grace, they can acknowledge that this is a good thing, right? I mean, there's going to
Mhm.
be different ways that they practice it, that we would argue is not so good. But that said, they understand that marriage is meaningful, right? For something, it's not just what we believe in the West now, which is marriage is a public profession of love between two people, right? uh, you know, Putting aside why it's only two people and why they're being restrictive like that. It like even we put aside the whole like aspect from again gay marriage or anything like that, why have an institution like that? Why have the wedding and the cost and the legal stuff and then having to go through a legal procedure to get out of it afterwards? If it's just saying, I love you. I mean, you have Facebook for that now, or at least, people did, right? We're in a relationship, right? So,
That's exactly
yeah,
it. I mean, I've been struggling to get a coherent answer on the secular side of this ever since that marriage debate got opened up. So, in terms of like same-sex marriage, but you could say that no fault divorce broke open the fault line, and then from there on, you can just sort of question any aspect marriage. Where that really led me to, I guess, my libertarian brain, and in that case was like they're really marriage only has a coherent framework within the bounds of religion because it's only those of religious faith that are willing to stand up for it. It seems very arbitrary for everybody else, in which case, don't call it that. Well, maybe society, or from a policy level, we're saying as a society we don't care about that. We, for some reason, we feel it's important to recognize relationships, and maybe to get ahead of it, maybe we don't need to have such strict parameters about those relationships. But if there's some taxation reason that we want to create these domestic units, then let's just take the word out of it and avoid the debate altogether, lest you tinker with, a several thousand-year-old institution.
Well, yeah, and I hear what you're saying, and I've seen the discussion go in this direction. I've seen it from especially the Jordan Peterson crowd, right? Which
Okay.
again, I think, again, don't get me wrong. I think Jordan Peterson, especially in the Toronto context, was a breath of fresh air, right? The professor at the University of Toronto who wasn't going to, or was going to dare to say that he didn't need to use up someone's preferred pronouns. That was,
Hmm.
in Toronto, that was radicals, right? And I don't think they've gotten over him since, and have literally driven him out of the province now, for
Yeah.
it. But one thing I'm going to challenge those of us who are either, conservative or I'm going to say broadly more traditional, whether it's due to like, some kind of religious foundation, or elsewise. I think we still have some work to do. And it's like a lot of things like the Marxists, which is really what this is a social Marxism working its way out because they knew they couldn't work on economic Marxism in the West. We were just too prosperous for it to work. So they're trying social Marxism instead, and that's why you're also having these quote unquote race issues as well. But we they know that words matter, right? And definitions matter. We on what I'll call broadly speaking the right aren't aren't up to date on that, and we're willing to concede or restrain stuff in order to kind of keep it in our, in our little sphere, right? And I think this is actually dangerous and why we're even in the spot is again, it's not just that we had the Marxists marching through the institutions through the 60s, 70s, and so on, but it's because the right was so willing to capitulate and retreat and say, okay, well, fine, you can have that. We'll keep this over here, right? And
Yeah.
so, with respect again to marriage, the challenge I'll give on this is that, again, if I don't know much about this book here, the Primal Lost book that I've got up, but yes, I mean, I think for sure, one place that you can start is to say before you go and cut the ties there between mom and dad, right? Remember, you have kids, and even like Michael Knowles said, even when you're divorced, you're still kind of doing something. You're trading off kids. I don't see a lot of women, for example, who are, again, the statistics bear this out. 70% of women, or 70% of the divorces are initiated by women, right? I don't see a lot of women going, well, I want to completely cut off every tie with that man, including his bank account, right? That does, that doesn't happen, right? There's always some kind of alimony or something that's built in here. Um, and so I think it is a good place for us to argue from strength to say marriage is more than just about the kids. It's not just a social institution to raise kids. It's also a covenant between a man and wife, that I don't think you need to even be religious to appreciate this. That this is how we are built. Again, I think evolution maybe is challenging, us to think that we're just nothing but fizzing chemicals. But for whatever the reason, right? And again, I think that it's pretty clear that it's because we're created this way by a creator God. Uh, Men are built to yearn for certain things, right? And women are built to yearn for certain things. And women, for example, it's security, protection, and provision. For men, it's to be respected, to lead, and to build, right? You see this again even in ancient literature. How many men get devastated when they find that their son has died in war, right? Because their line is cut off, right? That sense of legacy for men is huge, right? And so marriage gives an environment for that to grow and to thrive, and it's not something to just be kind of cast away on, from there. And again, I think that we struggle a lot on the right to articulate this and to say, well, no, hold on a minute, before you kind of throw this off to the side. First of all, as I said earlier, you need to define for us why marriage even exists.
Right.
Right? Again, if you're willing to say, well, we shouldn't even have marriage altogether. I mean, there are those people out there, but that's not where most of us are in this society, even today, right
And I'm
now.
not
Not even
necessarily
among,
saying, and
yeah,
even if I might have been there, I definitely toyed with the idea, but I was definitely put in my place wherever I proposed it. People really weren't willing to go there, and so I think that that's worth unpacking, because by at least putting the idea out there, we can sort of challenge ourselves to reaffirm what we actually think is important about this institution, and uh, see what role we have to play to reaffirm its value. But one thing I want to say is that policy and politics are just downstream of culture, right? That's a
absolutely. Yeah.
popular saying, and so it's you mentioned James Bond, but like, what are all the cultural things that kind of have led us to this place? Because at the end of the day, a divorce is it's a breaking of your vows, the breaking of your promise. It's whoever it is that initiates it, it's immediately, I don't want to be seen as like stigmatizing a whole population of people, but when you've crossed that line, and if you've crossed that line, you've actually said that you're breaking your promise, you're breaking your vows even, right? There's something, I think innately people agree that it's not just an arbitrary contract, but like we party because there's something special about the vows that we're making, whether it's in a church or in city hall. So why are we so like um you know weak bellied that 50%, like 50% of us are willing to break our promises that easily?
Well, and I think this was the other point I was going to get to, again, where I think we can go on the attack, and we should on this issue. And that is that, going back to what I was saying earlier about like our classical view of what our role with the government is, the social contract. We give up some
Mhm.
rights, you do the stuff for us, right? You make a society that's secure enough to have commerce and families and blah blah blah, right? Marriage, and this is the other thing that I think a lot of people need to be confronted upon. Marriage restricts our freedoms as well. And that's not a bad thing, because the same people who are like, I don't want to be, tied down to one person for the rest of my life, even if I'm
Mhm.
having kids with them, right?
Mhm.
Because marriage, again, I would say, like, there are some people who can't have kids. And this was one of the hard arguments, I think, that a lot of us, including myself, had to deal with the gay marriage debate in Canada 20 years ago.
Yes, I remember. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, is that, well, what are you going to do about the family who can't have kids? Well, again, the marriage is more than just the kids, right?
Mhm.
It is for the welfare and benefit of the man and the woman who enter into that covenant relationship. And we're willing to have our freedoms restricted by the government. We're willing to have our freedoms restricted by, say, employment contracts. Or if you don't believe me, go and look at any one of the apps on your phone and the terms of service, which even, law professors can't read, in a few hours, right? We're used to kind of giving away our freedoms on an almost daily basis, right? Because we think we're going to get something out of it. Why then is marriage the exception? Why is marriage the one contract that, like Michael Knowles was saying in that clip, that is the one that no one's at fault for breaking it, right?
Especially
And
when,
yeah,
like, I can easily skip over terms of service of an app just to get at the value, right? And I really um passively accept whatever restrictions or loss of freedom, right? But in a marriage, it's very like you're literally reading your vows. Like, it's your words out of your own mouth, right? Um that
and it's not 60 pages.
it's not even 60. It's actually very simple, right? It's not to say that I mean, if there are 60 pages behind it in terms of the legal code, it's all born out of those initial vows you make at the altar. So it's actually even more egregious that you're breaking your own promise that you wrote yourself.
Yeah, or that you were like, you may not
or
have
that you
written,
said
wrote it,
yourself. Yeah.
but you said I mean, you knew what you were getting into, right? And this is, I like what one guy said once, which is that, no one, speaking of the parents of the bride and the groom, no parent goes, hopefully, right? I know there'll be exceptions, but most parents don't go into the wedding ceremony saying, "I hope this ends in divorce." Right. That's just, and if they do feel that way, we just kind of know that that's wrong. Like, you don't want that for your kid, to have them go through the heartache and the pain of going through a divorce, because it is
Mhm.
painful, right? Even for the one who initiates it, there is a loss that can't be recovered. Full, like, it'll always leave a scar, is what I'm saying there, right?
Mhm.
So, and this again goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that when we're looking at kind of the macro issues of our society right now, the fact that we are seeing, again, in a place like Canada, a society in decline. Well, how did this happen? It happened because you had Pierre Trudeau sitting 3 generations ago saying the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation,
Mhm.
right? The people don't realize this, but going back to what you were saying, Lawrence, I'm just going to try to kind of tie this all, because I think it's all very well connected if you're willing to do the research and kind of follow the trail where it leads, the evidence where it leads, is that societal breakdown actually starts in the home, right? It's the most microscopic element of our civil society in any part of society, in any part of history, right? Any continent, anywhere you look, it's always going to start in the home, and it branches out from there, right? Maybe then it gets into, again, kind of business relationships. But as you said, politics is, the last step in the movement, in a movement's journey to becoming ubiquitous in society.
Yeah.
And my hope is that, again, I don't think psychology is going to save us, a la Jordan Peterson. You're not going to be able to tell people clean your room before you go out and try to save the world and have that lead to any kind of lasting change or reform in our society. But if you're willing to say, look, there are ways that, as human beings, and I'm purposely being broad here. I mean, I think there's a lot of, fundamental Christian theology behind this, in the way that we're actually built and wired as human beings. But I don't think you need to, to have that, be a restriction on anyone else appreciating this, because society, like every society's had marriage, right? And throughout all human history, right? And
Apparently
it's
so.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's been recognized as a stabilizing factor, right, through the entirety of human history. So with that said, you know, the reform needs to start with, us saying, okay, look, we're not going to, again, I'm I'm kind of conflicted with the guys who are saying I'm not getting married because I don't want to marry a feminist that is going to just basically ditch me at the first chance, that once she has the number of kids that she wants, which seems to be a thing, right? And I think that the
Mhm.
patterns have shown itself to be that way. But I get there are guys. I know of a case myself where the guy was clearly, I don't know what was going through his mind, that he decided to basically just kind of explode his marriage, almost overnight. Um, but the sorry, let me just kind of catch my thought here. Um, at the end of the day, this is a stabilizing factor for our society, and men saying, "I'm not getting into this," is now getting women to react and going, "Why aren't the guys stepping up?" Right? The next step from that we need to go to, is for men and women to say, "Well, look, let's come to some agreements and some restrictions that are enforceable, so that we're actually both getting protected from this." Because, again, candidly speaking, I think a lot of guys, according to the court system, and I brought this up on a previous episode of the podcast here, how here in Texas, the state actually rewards courts
Right.
um, for bringing in, like, splitting of families, like custody arrangements. Here, I'll bring it up in a second. But, we need to actually then, unfortunately, this does need to get political to a degree, right? Where we do need the governments, at the state level, provincial, whatever, to say, okay, look, we have a crisis right now because there's not enough families that are getting formed here. Enough men are saying we're opting out until something changes. But something change needs to be that we have to get rid of no fault divorce. I think that's an obvious first step. I don't think it needs to end there. I don't think it should end there. But that's a first step, is to say, you know what, you don't just get to blow up your family, right? Men or women, right? Just because you caught somebody walking down the street, like that famous meme, that guy looking behind his back. You don't get to just go, you don't just get to go follow your impulses, right? And admittedly
Right.
as well, to help kind of take the temperature down on our society, both men and women need to learn, first of all, to live with the people in their own home, right? And that is going to help them learn to live with the people who aren't in their own home, right? You're going to have to learn to live with people who disagree with you or don't see things the right way, or know enough to say this is the way that I keep, stacking the dishes in the cupboard or something. I don't know, right? That's part of what it is to live in a society is that your way is not always the right way. My way is not always the right way, and we have to learn on how to live with each other in that context.
I think, back to the cultural question. Ultimately, I think it's what types of lifestyle do we glamorize, right? We've become such an atomized society where the fundamental unit of society is the individual and no longer the family, that the idea of how to live peacefully in harmony um, in community is I think we've probably lost um, a sense of that. And I say this as a single person who doesn't have roommates, who has his own, condo, right? And I'm fully aware of some of the irony of where that might come from. But from, just from my observations, my own direct encounters with people, it's like we don't have the courage to this is really born out of a lack of courage, I would say. And it seems more courageous to blow up your family than it is to face face the prospect of having to readjust to each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I don't think that anyone single or married, needs to kind of be put down for having an opinion on this. Because as you said, like you can observe this, let's
Mhm.
put it this way, every single one of us came out of a relationship between a mom and a dad, right?
That's right.
It may not have been the ideal, it may not have been a very good situation, but every one of us has a mom and a dad, right? I like this line actually on the abortion side that I think you'll appreciate, Lawrence, is that even if, and I think it was Matt Walsh that said this, like, even if you have an abortion, you're still a mom or you're still a dad, right?
That's true. It's true.
You're just the parent of a dead baby now, right? And
Bad.
so the same thing on the marriage side too, is that so we have now again, I know that the technocrats are looking at getting us to the point where they have artificial wombs and they're going very Brave New World-ish on this, and that probably should
Um,
concern us.
that's how the Matrix happens.
Oh yeah, exactly. So you don't want this. And I would say again to the guys, who are like, I'm opting out of this. I'm just going to live a single life because it's not because they're gifted with singleness, right? Or I know like you would say like it's like a vocation for singleness, and that's fine. I mean that happens. People are like, I just don't have any desire to get married. Fine,
Mhm.
that's fair. This is not what's happening with these guys, and I think that's pretty obvious because they were on dates, right? They had tried the dating world and like, this is pretty ugly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they want to get married, and you're going to let the elites win if you go down this road, because the next thing they're going to introduce is the robo girlfriend, right? The one that you can program to be someone that you can tolerate to be with. Same thing's going to happen with women, right? With robo guys,
Mhm.
and then we're even more in their clutches because you're still not learning on how to deal with people. You can actually live a la COVID in your own little bubble, which is basically a cell, right? Content with what they're willing to give you, and they have control over you. I mean, like you think they're going to build robots that aren't going to spy on you when you can't go onto a web browser and not have like half a dozen different alphabet agencies and private companies you've never heard of capturing all your data, right? You do not want to put yourself in that situation. We part of like there's a lot that we need to course correct from. We're at the 11th hour of our civilization, frankly. But one of the things, on a deeply personal level, we need to do is we need to course correct on the marriage issue. We need to course correct on how we're going to treat marriage and relationships. And we don't have very much time, unfortunately, to do that. So I wish we did. But, when you and I were younger, maybe, we obviously had a generation to go. but they're at the point now technologically and just as far as what the Overton window is, as far as what's acceptable, to as far as privacy or the lack of privacy, we're at the point where we don't have much longer to go before we are in 1984, a Brave New World, society.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to our lack of courage and lack of willingness to live unselfishly. Those with a gift singleness really embrace it. It's not out of a counter reaction to marriage, or it's not negatively defined. It's even if you're not married, you still function unselfishly in a society. And that 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 notion of unselfishness is, I think, that's sort of needs to be reaffirmed, regardless of vocation.
No, absolutely. And this is part of, maybe we'll kind of end it off with this here.
Hmm.
This is part of a larger issue that encompasses everything that we've talked about and more, other issues that are adjacent as well, which is that we gave up on the idea of virtue, absolute right and wrong, three generations ago.
Hmm.
And we're paying the price for it now, right? Where we thought we could reinvent society. And I mean, you can see this in the mid 20th century media and literature. They really thought that they were going to use whatever they had built, in the nuclear age, to remake man and remake society and make it even better than it was before. Because there were problems before, but not nearly like, I really challenged a lot of people, even those of us on the right, that they were like, well, there's always been problems. It's been just as bad always. No, it hasn't. I mean, like you said, Lawrence, like, uh, when you and I are at that stage in our lives where we're looking at a place like Toronto and going, this isn't the place that we knew, right?
Hmm.
When we're looking at not just geography, but institutions, right? And saying this isn't the place that we knew. I look at the corporate world, right? There's a lot of stuff going on these days where people are like, I'm just not incentivized to work for some CEO that basically tried to, make me walk the plank 5 years ago over, all the stuff going on during COVID, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
Again, high trust society, right, is critical. If we're going to get a high trust society, you need to have virtue, right, in that society. People need to understand, like, they don't need someone else on their shoulder going, you need to do this because it's right. It needs to be internal, right? It needs to be something that you realize, okay, every life is precious. We don't go around murdering each other. We don't go around blowing up our marriages, right? And again, I think that's part of the larger issue. But last thing I'll say, and then I'll give you the final word. But my last part on this is that if anyone thinks, oh, I don't know if I want to get, actually bring in at-fault divorce anymore. I mean, like, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying the courts don't need to do thorough reforming at the family court level. You need to get away from courts of equity and get into more, actually courts of evidence. Um, but I would say we've tried it this way and it's hurting us all. Even if we haven't been in a family court, we're all hurt by this social system that we built up over the last, 6, 7 decades. Isn't it time maybe to try it going back to the old ways, right? And see if maybe these things aren't proven out in just practicality. And I would also ultimately argue it's proven out in just even what scripture says. But we're definitely, trying the same thing over and over and having it fail is a sign of insanity, as Einstein said. So I would say that it's time.